I can think of so many people outside the boundaries of our country, and maybe some within, but especially in other parts of the world, that would give almost anything to get to be in this classroom and to have the fellowship. And I think of the pastors in Muslim nations that would love to have the training. That's one of the things I've loved about the internet, anyways, is we've been able to provide a lot of that training when they have access to it. But believe it or not, there are still places in the world where that's not the case. It's changing. Whether that will be completed by the time, I just, my family calls me the male version of Debbie Downer, if any of you know who Debbie Downer is. But I tried to have something sent to Colorado to pick up when I'm there next week. It was a piece of plastic, and you couldn't because Colorado is about as blue as you can get anymore. And, those folks have not gone away. They're not going to go away. And once the pendulum swings back their direction, oh my, we are going to have a lot of decisions to make as to how to prioritize what the church does and how the church does it and everything else. And I'm not going to sit down here and tell you I've got all the answers to all that. When COVID hit in 2020, people have made entire films about churches that bravely reopened. We never closed. We were just, we looked at the numbers and went, something doesn't add up here. And we have the Lord's Supper every week, every Lord's Day, and the ministry of the word. And we just don't feel that this is something that people should be left out of this. And so we never closed. And it wasn't like we had some prophetic insight or anything like that. It was just like, we were in a context with a rhino governor, which right now we no longer have. The governorship has been stolen in the state of Arizona by a complete ditz of a woman who also happened to be the attorney general and oversaw her own election. It's just so. I live in Maricopa County, which is maybe only second to Chicago in the corruption of the voting process in the entire United States. It's astonishing. But anyhow, I could see some real challenging times ahead. We think, hey, we made it through 2020, 2021, 2022. We're good. And I'm always sitting back going, guys, these people haven't gone anywhere. They're still right where they were before, and they're just waiting. They're just licking their chops. And that's why I tell all the guys that are flying around now going, hey, why don't you get rid of that RV of yours, start flying again? I'm like, tell you what, brother. Once that privilege is taken away, again, in the future, you all come and get me and I'll tell you how to do it. I'll show you how to hook up the sewer hose without getting it all. Anybody ever seen the, the funniest man has ever lived? Mork. Robin Williams, RV. When the sewer tank explodes. My friends who own the RV park that I'm going to in Dolores, Colorado in a couple of days, they call it a poopsie whoopsie. when someone has something go wrong with their hose or something like that, it's a poopsie whoopsie. They happen all the time, unfortunately, in RV parks. There's no two ways about it. But I'll show you all how to do it so you all can travel. I'll be your mentor to help you all do that someday. But anyway. There could be some serious challenges in the future. And amazingly, as I was coming in, I also realized, and by the way, I saw somebody commenting, look, I'm on Twitter, guys, okay? And so I saw the discussion about how long it takes me to get to the subject from somebody in here. I'm not sure who that was. I can find out. And, well, you better hope your grades aren't important to you. Anyway, because someone said it was an hour and a half the first day, but only a half hour the second day. And I'm like, if you didn't see that first hour and a half the first day was actually really foundational to everything else I'm saying, then maybe you weren't listening as closely as you should have, because I wouldn't waste time just telling stories. I've been doing apologetics for 40 years. And so I was trying to lay some foundations that come about, become relevant later on. Same thing with yesterday morning. And then it struck me this morning as I'm driving in, we haven't looked at the key text on apologetics in the New Testament yet. And so I normally do that the first day, but we didn't. And I'm going to have to do this very much more briefly than I like to. But I think it is important. And of course, it's on the screen. But what I want you to see is what people... I openly admit that I was involved in apologetics for, I think, over 20 years, maybe 25 years, before I ever really came to understand what this text was actually saying. And I'm going to admit that most apologists abuse this text and have no idea what it's saying themselves. So I say that in a straightforward fashion. I was asked to address this text at a wretched conference with Todd Friel, Phil Johnson, at a huge Nazarene church somewhere out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio. I don't know why Nazarene churches tend to be in fields surrounded by cows, but they are. And this is a big, huge church, and very enjoyable time. No two ways about it. But in my preparation for that presentation, I've got the Nestle-Aland 28th edition over here on, up there on the screen. By the way, I keep saying and just running past it, I go, 29th should have been out already and all the rest of this stuff. It's true. The Nestle-Aland 27th was out for years and years and years and years. The 28th came out, and some of the changes were based upon this other project they're working on called ECM, Editio Critica Maior. It's going to be the multi-volume Greek New Testament. Incredibly expensive, but it's all going to be online. It is all online. And for other reasons, we have to keep buying all these volumes. I donated a few volumes to the library, so you can find some of them in the library. I just felt we needed to have some of those. But the changes are from, the application was called CBGM, Coherence-Based Genealogical Method. And it's fascinating stuff that I don't have time to get into today. But I did pitch the textual criticism class to Dr. Johnson during lunch yesterday. So who knows what may come of that. Anyways, all of that to say that you have a Greek New Testament here, and thankfully the NA 28 puts citations from the Greek Septuagint into italics. And thankfully, Accordance follows suit. And you'll notice that the Legacy Standard Bible follows the New American Standard's practice of putting Old Testament citations in all caps. And that's actually been a criticism once the computer age started, because all caps is yelling. So if you're quoting from the New American Standard, people are like, why are you yelling? Why are you putting it in all caps? Well, no, it's actually a citation from the Old Testament. But do you notice something? If you compare the NA 28 with the LSB, notice the end of verse 14. You are blessed, and do not fear their fear, and do not be troubled, is all in caps. But then the caps stop. And once you get into verse 15, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence, gentleness and fear. However, if you look at NA 28, it has, and do not fear their fear, and do not be troubled, in italics. But then look at verse 15. There are two words in verse 15 that are in italics, and they're not in all caps in the LSB or the NASB. Hey, Bob. Sorry you didn't get Saturday off. Bummer. So you've got kurion, deton Christon, hagiasate. And so kurion and hagiasate are italicized in the NA 28, but not in the English translations. I've not found an English translation. It's not that I did some huge search, but I've never encountered an English translation that put sanctify and Lord in all caps in the English. And so as I was preparing to speak at that conference, I started looking into this and I started looking at what was being quoted. And so you can see here that this is from Isaiah chapter 8, verse 12. And so if you pop on over to Isaiah 8:12, we'll go to 8:11, and we will obviously make the text a little bit bigger. Oh, I went to 8:1, great. So, get the Greek, Hebrew a little bit bigger here too. So, verse 11, for thus the Lord spoke to me with mighty power and instructed me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, you are not to say it is a conspiracy in regard to all this people call a conspiracy, and you are not to fear what they fear or be in dread of it. So here's your do not fear, starting right here is the Greek Septuagint, which is what Peter's quoting. Okay, but look at verse 13. It is Yahweh of hosts whom you should what? Whom you should consider as holy. And what's the term holy in the Septuagint? Here's Kurion auton hagiasate. So if you're gonna recognize this is the citation that Peter is using from Isaiah 8:12, the editors of the NA28 are correct to notice that both Kurion and hagiasate are in the next verse. That's a continuation of the citation, and so they should be in italics, which means over here in the English text, consistency would have sanctify and Lord in all caps as well, but nobody does it. And if you're wondering if I'm going to tell you why, no, I can't tell you why, other than it might look awkward or something. But looking past the editors of the LSB or NASB or ESV or any of all the rest of them, once you look at that, now there is a textual variant. You'll see here that in the Byzantine text primarily, it says, but sanctify the Lord God, or it'd be difficult. It's a difficult construction. Kurion deton Christon, or if it's theon. But sanctify the Lord as God, or sanctify the Lord God. I mean, they're both in the accusative. So, but if you look at the evidence there, all your earliest manuscripts, all of them, P72, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, Vaticanus, C, Psi, and if you're into, if you're into textual critical stuff here, that's really small. Let me, hold on a second here. Boom, boom, boom. Let's see if that works. It did not. Notice the underneath Sinaiticus, the Aleph, you have the number 33. What I've already seen in what's been published of ECM and what's coming out from ECM, 33 is proving itself to be an incredibly important witness to the New Testament text that seems to give us a very early form of the text that has what's called high coherence. And so what CBGM keeps doing whenever it's dealing with stuff that 33 contains, the reading is very often what's found in 33. So this is a pretty important minuscule manuscript that evidently had whatever they were copying was pretty early and pretty solid. So when you see 33, and 1739 is another one always to look for. 1739 is a 10th century minuscule, but we can tell that they were copying a 2nd or 3rd century original. Well, not original, but not autograph either. But they were copying from a very, very early witness in 1739 as well. So when you see 33 joining 1739 and joining all the major uncials, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, Vaticanus, that's an extremely strong reading. So, I note that it's there, but by far the strongest reading is sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. But what's the Lord then? So what's the kurion in the Greek Septuagint? You were just looking at it. What is kurion rendering here? Yahweh. Yahweh. This is a text that identifies Jesus as Yahweh in the New Testament. Most people don't even see it because we don't take the time to look back at what's being quoted. And also because for some reason the English texts don't use the standard form we use to at least say, hey, this is an Old Testament citation here in verse 15. We stop it in verse 14, and I can't tell you why. I don't know why that has happened. By the way, brother, we have covered some of the most important stuff in the entire class, just so you know. And the recording didn't work, and so I'm really sorry. It's just you just this way it works. Anyway, so now that you know what's being quoted, and this is about Yahweh, and it's about treating Yahweh as holy in the original citation. Now you look at this and you go, treat as holy Yahweh, who is the Christ, or the Christ who is Yahweh in your hearts. Sanctify Christ as Lord, as Yahweh in your hearts. Set him apart as holy. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting here going, oh. Because I had always wondered, maybe you've always wondered too, always being ready to make a defense to everyone that you're witnessing to out on the sidewalk. That's all it says. Make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. So the real context to this verse is not about doing apologetics and everything else. It's being ready to give a defense to someone who asks you, why do you have hope? Where did this hope that is in you? Where'd it come from? And the only way they can come to you to ask you that question is if they have seen in your life, your words, your attitudes, your actions, your perseverance, your faithfulness, that you have a hope they don't have. And where's that going to come from? Well, think about it. What does it mean? Because hagiasate is an imperative. It's a command. So, and this is not addressed to just elders or deacons or leaders, this is addressed to all Christian people. Peter's writing to the entire Christian church, everybody. This is something we're all to do. So what does it mean to sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts? Well, if once you recognize this is talking about sanctifying Christ as Yahweh, we sort of have a sort of general wishy-washy Lord idea, Lordship of Christ, da-da-da. This is a reference to the deity of Christ. You set apart, because that's what to sanctify means, to set apart, to treat as holy, as utterly different than anything else. If we set Christ, the Messiah, as Yahweh, apart in our hearts, in the very center of our being, that means he becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. He becomes the central thing. And so we respond to everything in our lives in light of his lordship, his ownership of us. We've died with him. We are to live for him. And so it changes our response to everything, or at least it should change our response to everything. And hence should give us a hope that people around us will see. And when they see it and they don't have hope, they have absolutely no hope whatsoever, and you do, and it's like, where? How? What? Well, let me tell you how that is. That's being ready to give a defense for that hope. And so, it is the term, there's the term for apologetics, apologion. It's right there, but that's not really what it's talking about. It's not really talking about doing debates and all the rest of that kind of stuff. it is saying that all Christians should have Christ so central in their heart, their thinking, that it reflects in their behavior, in their attitudes, in their words, which will result in people asking us, how'd you get this hope? Where's it coming from? And, Christians down through the centuries, as they've been imprisoned, as they've been persecuted, story after story after story of, being in imprisonment or being under persecution and not able to have the kind of life other people have. And yet people around them see that and they ask. Fellow prisoners ask. People who aren't being persecuted, they see it and they see it's not right and just, and these people are not doing anything wrong. They're being persecuted, and yet they continue. They don't complain, and they're not. Why? They ask the question. That's what this text is about, and it really becomes more clear once you know what the text is actually saying, which unfortunately a lot of translations somewhat muddle. Yeah.
So is it the idea that when you have something, it exposes when someone else, so like if I'm around somebody who has true courage, then it would expose, if I have cowardice in my heart, then I'm exposed for that. And so then it's like, I see their courage. And so in some sense, the hopefulness of a believer exposes hopelessness in the unbeliever.
Well,
Is that
elpidos, hope, is a key term in the New Testament that sets Christians apart. And one of the reasons we don't necessarily focus on it as much as we should or don't understand it is we've got it easy. I mean, there's probably not anybody in here who is concerned that they're going to go to bed hungry tonight because how much food is out here right now, right? And yet, up until only literally a few generations ago, the vast majority of a person's energy was devoted to just getting food, surviving. When you talk about the poor in the New Testament, I'm not talking about people who get food stamps. In those days, the economy could only produce enough for a limited number of people. And if you're in the number of people past that, you died. You lived on the margins, you struggled. And so the poor were very different than the poor we have today. Most of us live as kings. The homes we have, the food we eat, medical, oh my goodness. And so it's easy for us to redefine what was going on back then and not realize having hope, that despair was the normative human experience. Most people died of tooth decay. Diseases would hit you. You have no idea where it came from, how to protect yourself from it, and nothing to do when it hit. During the medieval period, a woman would have to have 10 live children to hope to get one through to adulthood. You look at every one of the reformers, they lost children. Luther, Calvin, they all did. And you just feel so helpless. And so when you feel helpless, you don't have hope. And so the Christian hope, and it's not just a hope down the road someplace. Well, if I get a disease tomorrow and I die the next day, then I have peace with God. Well, that's vitally important. Sure, yeah. I mean, but why do you think the message of justification by faith rang the heart's bells during the Reformation? It's because Luther and everybody in his world had seen dead bodies on the streets. The plague would still come through. People would be leaving town and heading for the mountains to try to get away from the plague. Death was all around everybody. And so despair and sadness and, it was the normal human experience. And so to have hope, even when being persecuted, to have hope in the midst of trial and tribulation, we don't think about it because we have so much money, we can medicate ourselves and we can get operations to look better and everything else. We just push it all off. That's why our society, look, any Christian in the first century knew a whole lot more about death and hope and how to deal with grieving than anybody in our day does. We don't even take our kids to funerals anymore. Only a few generations ago, we all lived in the same house, generation after generation. You saw your great-grandparents and your grandparents die. You knew what death was. How many people, I don't know, I didn't know how old I was before I saw my first dead body. I'd gone to funerals, but they were closed casket and stuff like that. I'd never seen a corpse, probably until I was in my 20s at some point. That's what's changed. That's what's the unusual part. And that's why most churches struggle mightily to deal with real grieving. You don't take 2 weeks off of work and then everything's fine after that. You don't even start grieving for at least a month. A month to 6 weeks, you're in the shock stage. Grief doesn't even start till after that. And since we don't talk about it, I can't tell you how many people I'll do my presentation on grieving, which I hate to give. I really hate to give it. But I do because of the book that I wrote. But I'll give my presentation on grieving, and I'll talk about how it's a very common experience for people to experience anger toward the one who died. Wives angry that their husband has left them and has left them without an identity. And I've seen women gasp and break down in tears and then tell me later, I have hated myself for the feelings I've had. And you tell me this is common? I'm not the only one? And they thought they were the only one. And once they found out they weren't the only one, all of a sudden they can now deal with it, you see, because we don't talk about it. Who wants to talk about it? It's not going to make you the most popular presenter. We have a class tonight on Wednesday evening on grief and death, and then we have one over here on how to have a successful youth trip. Which one's going to get most people? So we don't. You don't hear sermons about it, and so we don't even know how to deal with it. So I think the hope, with hope that is in you, is just simply how our speech, our actions, our reactions are conditioned by what it means to set Christ apart as Yahweh in our hearts. But see, we don't get that part. It's just sort of a awkward translation that no one ever focuses on. And so I thought it was important that we look at it and be aware of that. And you will hear this text cited over and over and over and over and over again, because there's prosopologion. That was our IRC chat channel. We had a journal for a while that was titled Prosopologion. The whole 9 yards straight out of this text. It's the Classicus Locus. But it's actually really not talking about that. It's relevant, but it's actually not really talking about that. So what happens when you have texts that are well known? Very often you've actually missed it. You actually haven't understood what it's actually talking about to begin with. Okay. All right, so we've got a lot to try to get through here, and I'm going to have to move along at a fairly decent clip if we're going to get everything done. I don't want to go so fast that it's not useful to you, but I did spend another half hour telling stories. If that's what you all want to put on Twitter, you go ahead and do that. I have documentation that you are simply being mean to me. Remember, I always get the last line. So there we go. I will finally get to partake of a little bit of our, how many generations of mankind went past without ever being able to go pulp free? I hate pulp. I'm sorry. I from the time I was a kid, I love orange, but I hate pulp. And and cold. You know how wonderful cold water is? If you ever go to Europe, you'll find out how rare it is too, because you have to ask for ice, and they look at you like you're a freak if you ask for ice. And I live in Phoenix, and oh my, cold glass of water on a day when it's 117 degrees in the shade is absolutely glorious. All right, when sola scriptura is rejected, the Marian dogmas of Rome as a warning today, we could profitably do an entire intensive class just on Roman Catholicism. The history, development, papacy, ecclesiology, sacramentology. And I should just simply say, the less you know about the history of Rome, its current manifestations, which of course, especially since Vatican II, are much wider than they ever were before. But the less you know about, especially the church, the Roman Catholic Church from, let's say, the Council of Constance, or maybe, from the burning of Jan Hus through the papal syllabus fairs in the 19th century, okay, that time period. That is where you have the majority of the apologetic interaction of Protestantism as a whole, and Reformed Protestantism specifically, with Rome, than you have at any other point in time. And while Rome has certainly changed since Vatican II, not so much absolute dogma, but emphasis. It's sort of like when I say Mormonism is changing. It has. But they haven't come out and said, we used to teach this, now we teach this. They haven't done that. All these groups change those teachings by de-emphasizing them for a few generations, and then you can get away with redefining them. So that's how the Jehovah's Witnesses are doing now. They learned their lesson after all their false prophecies. And after the 75 false prophecy, they lost over 1 million people over the next 10 years. 1 million people just disappeared from the Watchtower Society. And so they've learned their lesson, and so they're changing stuff now, but they're doing it slowly. Slowly and carefully via emphasis, de-emphasis, emphasize something else, de-emphasize the stuff that used to emphasize, things like that. And so similarly, Roman Catholicism, you still have Tridentine, Council of Trent, the greatest things in sliced bread, Roman Catholics today. But they're out of touch with the modern magisterium. I truly believe that the majority of the magisterium, the leadership of the Catholic Church, the bishops as a whole, bishops, archbishops, cardinals, so on and so forth, the curia in Rome, all sorts of, in this case, instead of Arabic terms, it's Latin terms that we have to use. I believe without a doubt that the majority of the curia are minimally inclusivists. And I think many of them, I'm sure Francis was a universalist. Now, what's the difference between a universalist and a
Universalists believe that everybody's going to heaven. Inclusivists believe that only certain people are going to heaven, but most people are going to heaven.
Yeah, specifically inclusivism. I did a debate against John Sanders a number of years ago on inclusivism. He's an inclusivist. They believe that any faith movement toward whatever God has been presented to you is, in fact, a faith movement toward Jesus, even if you don't know that he's Jesus. So, and you see this. There's a big discussion going on right now. Now debates are happening and everything else. I haven't even had a chance to listen to one. There was one that Jay Dyer was involved with. Anybody know who Jay Dyer is? Yeah. Did you all see what happened with me and Jay Dyer a few months ago? A little bit. I floated the idea of he and I debating Nicaea 2 and icons. His response literally was on the level of a fourth grader hyped up on sugar on the playground. I mean, this guy has the mental maturity of a fourth grader. He's unbelievable.
He's an Eastern Orthodox shock jockey.
Yeah, he's a shock jock. And in fact, doesn't he work for he actually co-hosts with that guy that's into all the conspiracy theories and stuff on the internet. The guy that got hit with like $1 billion thing for the Alex Jones. Yeah, he works with Alex Jones. I mean, this guy is just wild as can be. Anyway, they just had a debate where the Eastern Orthodox were attacking the Roman Catholics because the Roman Catholics were saying, yes, we worship the same God as the Muslims. And, I've done a couple programs now going, guys, look, all of you that are out there making all this argumentation, you don't show any evidence whatsoever of ever having sat down and talked with an imam about this. You don't seem to understand what the Muslims say about this. You're just running with post-Vatican II. But post-Vatican II does say they adore the same God and are included in the plan of salvation. So inclusivism, the inclusivism is very, very, very clear. It's there. And that's not what the Roman Catholic Church taught for centuries and centuries. It's so painfully obvious that there wasn't a single Roman Catholic bishop of Rome before the 1800s that believed any of this stuff that is now considered to be, a given. So this stuff's all out there. So there's all sorts of stuff. And if we don't understand Roman Catholic polemics, we won't understand Reformed responses. So if you read Turretin and you appreciate Turretin, you need to understand so much of what he's saying is in response to Roman Catholicism. And that's why Eastern Orthodox say, hey, Catholics and Protestants, they're just two different sides of the same coin. Just dismiss the whole thing. So there's lots of stuff. Ecclesiology. It's so obvious to me that most Baptists, for example, I was raised a Baptist, but I was in churches that never had a plurality of elders. We had one pastor that was hired by a deacon board. And I was in seminary before I did a study on elders and went, it's plural. You're supposed to have more than one. And they're not subject to deacons. What is this all about? How did this never ever come up? I had never heard a sermon about it. We just skipped over it. We just never gave it a second thought. Well, you read the 1689, and it's very clear on ecclesiology, plurality of elders. Why? Because you're involved in polemics. You're involved in apologetics against Roman Catholicism. And if you're pointing at the Catholics going, that office isn't biblical, and that office isn't biblical, and that office isn't biblical, you better have a basis for your offices being biblical. See? But, man, once you get into my background, you just dismiss Roman Catholicism with a wave of the hand. They're obviously completely lost. I don't even have to give a second thought. And I don't have to give a second thought as to what happened in the past that gave form to the language that I use now. So you go on from there. So there's lots of stuff we could look at, but the Marian dogmas, man, like I said, you go online. One of many useful things about social media is there are people that I don't know why they do it, but they just scour the internet looking for videos and all sorts of stuff like that that are fascinating. I don't even know how they find this stuff. I mean, evidently they have a bunch of websites they visit regularly, but I wouldn't even know how to find these things. But the stuff that I've seen over the past couple of years of Marian devotion and the parades in European nations with big old statues of Mary being carried along. And of course, we've all seen the ones where Mary falls off the cart, and people are screaming because her head comes off and things like that. And we sort of sit around going, oh, well, worship a statue is going to happen. But to see it with more regularity reminds you of just how much a part of Roman Catholic piety Mary is. The picture on your screen is from 1993. Yes, that is me facing the camera. I had or it might be 94 now I think about it. It was that year that I started riding a bike. I had been in seminary. I was always sick. I had just had double hernia operation, and I was like, man, I'm too young to fall apart. I've got to get in shape. And so I went out and bought a Target mountain sled. I had no idea what I was doing. But I started riding, and that first year I rode 5,000 miles and trimmed down. I've been trimmed most of my life, even though it's not my genetics. I ain't trimmed no more. But I'd love to get back there if I could fight off, 3 or 4 different heart stuff and arthritis and everything else. But maybe those days are past. Anyways, there I am. In my nice little boring Reformed Baptist suit. I hadn't discovered Rush Limbaugh ties yet, or bow ties, either one. And I am in a radio studio in Boston, Massachusetts, WEZE. The host is Janine Graff, and the person facing away, gesticulating with his right arm, is Mr. Jerry Matitix of Catholic Answers. And we are about to do 2 debates at Boston College, one on the Apocrypha and one on justification by faith. Interestingly enough, even though Jerry and I had jokingly said that we hoped we could get through our presentations on the Apocrypha without being drowned out by the snoring, we had agreed to that. That ended up being much more of a contested debate than the one on justification, because it got into church authority and stuff like that. Anyway, this is prior to the debates. And I remember this. Obviously, my perspective was the opposite side, but I remember those the arms of the microphones there and stuff like that. And I have down next to my right foot, I have a book bag. And in my book bag, I had a little booklet. Still have it to this day. I've kept it. And at this time, I was hospital chaplain at Thunderbird. And one of my jobs, the Jehovah's Witnesses kept sneaking into the hospital. And they'd run around to all the various waiting rooms and stack them all up with watchtowers and wakes. And so my job when I came in was to go to all the waiting rooms and collect all the watchtowers and wakes. And I ended up literally with a stack about this tall in my tenure as a hospital chaplain there, of Watchtower and Wake magazines. But we had a little chapel, and they've moved it now. I've actually had a number of operations at Thunderbird myself recently. And I walked into the chapel one day, and I happened out of the corner of my eye to see something stuck into the cushions of one of the chairs. And I went over and I pulled it out, and it was a book, a little teeny pamphlet, it was maybe 20 pages long, of prayers to Mary. And I remember sitting down and opening this thing up. And this is the first prayer that I ran into. Now, why am I showing you the thing with the WEZE radio? I reached down and I pulled that out. I had put it into my book bag when I went to Massachusetts. And I pulled it out, and I read this prayer on the air. Now, knowing Jerry, I expected him to go, Mr. White, Mr. White, Mr. White. This is just a pious prayer. This does not represent official Roman Catholic doctrine. That's what I was expecting was going to happen. Okay? So here is the prayer exactly coming out of that book, because you'll find slightly different versions of this in a number of printed and published sources. O Mother of perpetual help, thou art the dispenser of all the goods which God grants to us miserable sinners. For this reason he has made thee so powerful, so rich, and so bountiful, that thou mayest help us in our misery. Thou art the advocate of the most wretched and abandoned sinners who have recourse to thee. Come then to my help, dearest Mother, for I recommend myself to thee. In thy hands I place my eternal salvation, and to thee do I entrust my soul. Count me among thy most devoted servants, take me under thy protection, and it is enough for me. For if thou protect me, dear Mother, I fear nothing, not from my sins, because thou wilt obtain for me the pardon of them, nor from the devils, because thou art more powerful than all hell together, nor even from Jesus, my judge himself, because by one prayer from thee, he will be appeased. So what are the three things? I remember sitting there going, this person is afraid of their sins, devils, and Jesus. But Mary is the solution for all of it. But one thing I fear, that in the hour of temptation I may neglect to call on thee, and thus perish miserably. Obtain for me then the pardon of my sins, love for Jesus. Obtain for me love for Jesus, final perseverance, and the grace always to have recourse to thee, O Mother of perpetual help. That's why I kept the booklet. I couldn't believe that anyone could ever actually believe this. And so I brought it with me. I read that on the air, fully expecting what the response was going to be. And instead, go back to the picture here. Instead, Jerry looked across those carts and microphones, and he looked at me and he said, James, my prayer for you is that someday you too will be able to pray that prayer with me. He didn't reject it. He didn't correct it. He didn't try to balance it. He accepted it fully as representative of what he believed. Now remember, he was all but dissertation at Westminster Theological Seminary, PhD. He was, again, the first ordained PCA minister to ever convert to Roman Catholicism. And of course, it accepted all of the Marian dogmas by that point in time and everything else that comes along with it. So if you have the stomach for it, I wrote a book in 1999. There was a tremendous amount of speculation at the time that with the coming of the year 2000, Pope John Paul II was going to define the fifth Marian dogma. Millions of petitions had been signed by Roman Catholics and submitted to the Vatican to have Mary defined as co-redemptrix, co-mediatrix, and advocate for the people of God. Now again, just make sure you understand this. In Roman Catholicism, you have doctrine and you have dogma. Dogma is de fide, by faith. It's definitional. You deny a de fide dogma, and you technically are no longer a Roman Catholic. Now, the majority of people teaching in Roman Catholic institutions today don't accept all those dogmas. But that's the technical definition. Doctrine is not de fide. And so popes have taught since middle 1850s that Mary is a co-redemptrix with Christ, co-redeemer, redemptrix, the feminine form, co-advocate for the people of God. And so it has been taught by popes, but not infallibly defined. And so there was speculation, John Paul II, his coat of arms says, totus tuus. But that's short for totus tuus sum Maria. My heart is totally yours, Mary. So deeply dedicated to Marian devotion. And so I wrote a book called Mary, Another Redeemer, ? It's only available on Kindle now. But I go through all the various dogmas and I explain them for people who aren't Roman Catholics and give the history and stuff like that, and then go into this stuff. One of the books I had to read as a resource for that project was called The Glories of Mary by Alphonsus de Liguori. And as I said, if you have the stomach, if you're going to do a project on Mary, if you're in an area, if you're in southern Louisiana, okay, you got no way around this. It's just the way it is. Knowing Liguori, reading it is a spiritual task. It is It's hard. It really honestly is. But I'd highly recommend it. I'll be quoting from him a lot in this presentation. And you might go, well, but it's not official dogma. Not only has he been made a doctor of the church, just like Thomas Aquinas, the book has the nihil obstat and the imprimatur, which doesn't mean much today, but it used to mean that it had been examined and as authority and doctrinally pure and all the rest of that stuff. But it's gone through over 800 editions. 800 editions since it was really published in innumerable languages, okay? So it is sort of the textbook of Marian devotion and Marian prayers and things like that. This stuff's out there. Most Protestants, if you weren't raised in it, you don't even know about it. A lot of people that were raised in it still don't know about, they know about the Marian devotion, they just don't necessarily know about the sources and stuff like that. But Alphonsus de Liguri, look it up. Karl Keating, the founder of Catholic Answers, said, as a practical matter, this kind of doctrine is one of the last accepted by someone approaching the church, particularly as someone coming to the church from fundamentalism, and it is accepted ultimately on the authority of the church rather than on the authority of clear scriptural references. Now, that's for sure. Karl was an attorney before he started doing all this stuff, and he was right about this. It's not on the authority of clear scriptural references. I've met with many, many, many apostates who've swum across the Tiber River, including ministers, Presbyterian ministers, Baptist ministers, et cetera, et cetera. And it's true. The final step is to just go, well, you know what? If sola scriptura isn't true, if this is the one true church founded by Christ, then I may not understand all this stuff. It may seem weird to me. It may strike me that this isn't what the early Christians believed. But if the church tells me this, then I need to bow to its superior wisdom. And that's eventually what gets people to go that direction. Fundamentalists, always looking for a biblical citation, can see no reason to accept a belief in Mary as mediatrix of all graces. But they can, if they take the effort, come to see that there is at least nothing in the doctrine that contradicts Christ's role as the one mediator. Well, obviously, we disagree with that. His role as mediator is not lessened because she has been allowed to assist him. Well, obviously, we would disagree about that. And Karl never was willing to debate me, and he's not involved with Catholic apologetics anymore. In fact, as far as I know, Karl just basically hikes in the woods these days.
But now, historically, we can't see where she's been co-redeemer until like thousands of years after Christ, right?
Well, co-redemptrix, well, keep something in mind, folks. Once you accept these dogmas, then you can find them. I know Roman Catholic apologists, honestly, that are so devoted to this. They could look across the street at dent masters, paintless dent removal, and find evidence of Mary in that sign.
Yeah.
I'm serious. It is astonishing what the human mind can do. And especially in this. Look, how many times has Mary been found in a tortilla over the past 30 years, right? I live in Phoenix. We have a huge Hispanic population. And, well, I'll actually be showing, let me, hold on a second. Yeah. This is Clearwater, Florida. And the first time I went out to debate Bobson Genis? I think it was Bobson Genis in Clearwater, Florida. Michael Fallon took me out here. This was the Ugly Duckling car dealership in Clearwater, Florida. And there used to be a palm tree in front of that bank of windows. In fact, you can see small palm trees in front of it. There was a big old honking palm tree. And the manager level guy that was up there on that upper floor wanted to be able to see. So he had the palm tree cut down. And a couple days after the palm tree was cut down, there's a guy over at a gas station nearby, looks over and goes, Mary. And you can see the pictures there. And people look at that and go, it's an apparition of Mary. What else could that possibly be? It was reconstituted water stains from watering the palm tree. Okay? But that's Mary. And so the people start flocking to this building. And the Ugly Duckling car dealership, which is a used car dealership anyways, goes, I wonder if any like Marian groups would like to buy our building. And they sold it and made, sold it for millions of dollars. And this Marian devotion group bought it, and they started having masses set in front of it, all this stuff. I got to see it. Mike took me over to see the thing. And then shortly thereafter, someone with an extremely powerful slingshot de-Marianized the building. Took the windows out. The Marian group still owns it, and they still have a chapel down on the bottom floor, and weird ladies get messages from Mary down there, and all the rest of this kind of stuff. But we had on 16th Street in Phoenix, we had a yucca plant. And it put out a shoot that didn't go straight, and it sort of curved. And someone walking by goes, Mary. And so they're closing down 16th Street, and people are, setting up booths and selling tacos, and because Mary has appeared in a yucca plant on 16th Street in Phoenix. And then one night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody walks by with a machete and de-Marianizes the yucca plant, and that's the end of that. So, yes, this is a cult, both in the technical term, a religious devotion focused upon a particular person or thing, as well as a cult in the worst form of that. And that's why she's seen in cereals and tortillas and everything you can imagine. And if you want, she was supposedly seen in Zaytun, Egypt, over an Orthodox church. Wasn't even a Roman Catholic church. There are pictures, there were television things, there's all this discussion of Zaytun. This was 1970, 71, as I recall. And recently, there was a Protestant apologist, Cameron Bertuzzi, of Capturing Christianity. He's still online, still doing his thing. I heard him having a dialogue with a Catholic on John 6, and I said at the time, this kid's doomed. He has no idea what he believes. He doesn't know what his Protestant faith is. He doesn't know Sola Scriptura, doesn't know John 6. He's going to convert. He did. And now he's a Catholic apologist. And just 6 months ago, he came out with a video about Zaytun. And he said, in my opinion, Zaytun is a stronger evidence of the truthfulness of Christianity than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because there were so many witnesses to Zaytun that we don't have today for the resurrection. So you can go from being a quote-unquote Protestant apologist to putting out videos like that in a very short period of time.
Now, are there any Catholics that would say, yeah, I'm Catholic, but that one night I just can't go with the Marian doctrines?
Well, it's de fide, it's dogma. The last dogma defined by the Roman Catholic Church, de fide, was the bodily assumption of Mary in 1950. And so I may have the quotes in here, so I'm taking way too much time here. Okay, how do we get here? Romans define the following dogmas as part of the Christian faith. These beliefs cannot be denied by anyone wishing to remain in fellowship with the one true church. Okay, so you have the perpetual virginity of Mary. So here's the Universal Catholic Catechism. The deepening of faith in the virginal motherhood led the church to confess Mary's real and perpetual virginity, even in the act of giving birth to the Son of God made man. In fact, Christ's birth did not diminish his mother's virginal integrity, but sanctified it. And so the liturgy of the church celebrates Mary as I Parthenos, the ever virgin. So in case you're not aware of this, we're all adults in here. Women have something called a hymen, which is a barrier that has to be broken to conceive or to give birth. Babies come through the same channel that hymen's at. And so if a baby's going to get out, that hymen has to have been already broken, which is the only way she can conceive in the first place, because that's what happens that's how you lose your virginity. According to Roman Catholicism, and this is part of the dogma, this is, you see it right here. This is how physical this is. Mary's virginal integrity was never taken away from her. Now, just stop for a second and go, then how did Jesus get born? Read the Protevangelium of James. This came from a Gnostic-tinged, early semi-Christian document from the 2nd century, where literally part of the story is a woman reaching her fingers into Mary's body to make sure her hymen is still intact. It's literally part of it. And there's a description of Jesus' birth. And there is a bright light that becomes overwhelmingly bright. And then when it finally comes down to where you could look again, Mary's not pregnant anymore, and there's a baby. Jesus beamed out of Mary. It's Star Trek all over again. Not even a C-section. That would be no, he beamed out. It denies a child is born to us. It's Gnostic. And yet it's foundational to Roman Catholic theology. And you can have Roman Catholic theologians and historians, they know what Gnosticism is all about. They look at this as like, oh, but this is the tradition of the church. It is truly, truly amazing. Mary as Theotokos, literally God-bearer, or more commonly Mother of God. I mentioned this to you yesterday. There is an orthodox and acceptable use of this term, which means that when Jesus was conceived, he truly was the God-man. Yes, sir?
No, when are you going to continue your storytelling with Uncle James? I heard you in one of the videos you read this story of Mary.
Well, we'll do things on the dividing line where I read the entirety of the Protevangelium of James on the dividing line one day. We call it Story Time with Uncle Jimmy, but it's just when I read these weird, wild Gnostic things. I've read the Gospel of Thomas during that and all sorts of other stuff. So, whenever there's something to read that I think people need to be exposed to, I did, the last time I did it, I read the Acts of Paul and Thecla. This is stuff that it's part of the story of the early church, but most people never read it, so they're not aware of it. And that's something I do on the dividing line. Some people would say that I tried to do everything I can to make sure that people don't listen to the dividing line, because obviously I'm not trying to entertain. And we literally have done entire programs of the dividing line where I remember one program probably about 2007 or 8. I did nothing more than the entire program was examining every single ayah in the Quran that can have any reference to Jesus. Woo, thrilling. That's how you get people to give money. Yeah. We're trying to build our kingdom, No, that's just.
Is it podcast only or is it YouTube? The dividing line? It's on YouTube.
You don't know.
I think that's a fair question. It's not on Twitter a lot. I've seen theologians. I just not dividing line. I'll follow I'm sorry.
Ow, 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 ow. I'm going to tell my daughter that. Now, I have no problem being known simply as Summer's dad. That's cool. But I don't know. I've just sort of assumed everybody sitting in this room knew what the dividing line is. It's the longest running theological podcast on the planet. We invented it. Most people don't know that. We invented it because we were poor. We were on a radio station and we were paying money to be on this radio station on a Saturday. Who listens to terrestrial radio on a Saturday? Nobody does. So every phone call we were getting was coming from the internet. And this is a brand new thing. I mean, this is the year 2000, okay? And you didn't have MP3, you didn't have streaming, but you had something called real audio. And one day, Rich, we're trying to make ends meet, and Rich is like, I think I could set up a real audio server. I think we could do this ourselves. And so we concluded the contract with the radio station and put together a real audio server and started doing the dividing line on the internet. 2000. So we basically invented it. We don't know anybody else who was doing it. It's certainly not an apologetics thing. And so then eventually, Rich forced me to start doing it video-wise. And so it's on YouTube, Twitter. I don't even know all the things it's on. We don't keep track of that kind of stuff. But the one thing that we do know is we have a massive global audience. And we don't try to do that. We don't advertise. We've never spent a dime advertising the dividing line. Never have. It's all word of mouth. But yes, that's where you'll find this stuff, and that's where Summer got the idea too. By the way, just so you know. But yes, this is the stuff we do on the dividing line, and that's one of the reasons I use an RV now too. I have a studio in the back of the RV. I put a background up behind. I've got 2 4K cameras, the whole 9 yards, and when I debated Jared Longshore on paedobaptism last summer, it's in the back of that RV. So that's one of the main reasons we do that. It's a whole lot easier to do that than when I'm in a hotel room or something like that. Anyway, all right, Theotokos. There is an Orthodox acceptable use of this term, but most Roman Catholics do not use it in the historical and acceptable form. The term historically referred to the deity of Christ, not a position of Mary, but that is a dogma, that Mary is the Theotokos, mother of God, and you have to define what that means. Nestorius preferred saying the mother of the Messiah. Yeah.
Do you remember when was the first Marian dogma, main dogma? What year? Do you remember?
Well,
Early century?
Well, see, you're using the term dogma as it's used in modern Roman Catholicism. That developed over time, so there's no way to answer that question because Theotokos, for example, is pushed through at the Council of Ephesus by Cyril. That's in the 4th century. But you had monks. Most of the bad stuff in Christian theology has come from monasteries over the years. You had the Desert Fathers in the 2nd century. And I don't have time to go through this. I do it in the early church history course. But the source... The earliest source of all this stuff really is the monastic movement in Egypt in the late 2nd century into the 3rd century. That's really where it starts coming from. But I mean, stuff like the most recently defined ones, Immaculate Conception, 1854, Bodily Assumption, 1950, utterly unknown in the early church. Again, unless you're a Marian devotee and you can find it in any word you want to find it in. Okay, so there are people who will find it, well, Mary's called pure over here, and that's like immaculate, and therefore it's the Immaculate Conception. Well, Paul was called that too, but no, they just won't follow through with that. I can name you names. William Albrecht is one of the best ones for how to absolutely destroy history, to come up with anything about Mary. Okay, next doctrine, dogma. Remember, I'm not talking doctrine, dogma. The Immaculate Conception of Mary, 1854. This doctrine defined as dogma only 150 years ago. It should be 170 years ago now. First appears in the writings of the Gnostics of the 2nd century, was rejected by numerous early fathers, and 7 different popes taught contrary to it. It did not come into its modern form until a British monk named Eadmer introduced it in the 12th century. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not believing anything promulgated by a British monk named Eadmer. Bob, I would believe anything Bob would say as he drives by much more than I would someone named Eadmer. But very quickly, I sort of feel like I'm falling behind here, but very quickly, we need to understand these doctrines. When we talk about the Immaculate Conception, that has nothing to do with the virgin birth. It has to do with Mary's birth. And that Mary was conceived without the stain of original sin. Let me see if that's... On December 8th, 1854, Pope Pius IX promulgated an apostolic constitution titled Ineffabilis Deus. Accordingly, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, for the honor of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, for the glory of the adornment of the Virgin Mother of God, for the exaltation of the Catholic faith, and for the furtherance of the Catholic religion, and by the authority of Jesus Christ our Lord, and the blessed apostles Peter and Paul, and by our own, we declare, pronounce, and define that the doctrine which holds the most blessed Virgin Mary at the first instance of her conception, by a singular grace and privilege granted by Almighty God in view of the merits of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the human race, was preserved free from all stain of original sin, is a doctrine revealed by God and therefore to be believed firmly and constantly by all the faithful. So, let's use an illustration that Jerry Matitix uses, okay? Because he wants to be able to make it more acceptable to Protestants. You're walking through the forest, you come around a corner, it's sort of a blind corner, and there's a huge mud hole. You fall into the mud hole, you're covered in mud, someone comes along, they pull you out of the mud hole and try to help you start getting cleaned up. That's like what Jesus does. You've fallen into the mud hole, you're covered in mud, but he can clean you up, he can rescue you, he can save you, he can clean you up. But because remember in Luke chapter 2, how does Mary describe herself? She says, God my Savior. Okay? So he says, so you can be one kind of a Savior. You fall into the mud hole, you're saved from the mud hole, you have to get cleaned up afterwards. But what if you had a situation with Mary, because of who she's going to be and bring about the birth of Jesus? She comes around that corner, she's about to fall into the mud hole, but someone reaches out and grabs her and keeps her from ever falling in and getting anything on her. That person is still her Savior, but she never got the stain of the mud. Okay? So that's what they're saying happens with Mary. All the rest of us fall into the mud hole, stain of original sin, have to be cleaned up, and the initial cleaning up is done how in Roman Catholicism? Baptism. Baptism removes the stain of original sin. Infant baptism does. So, but with Mary, before the cross, before the resurrection, in light of the certainty that this is going to happen, there is a free application of the merits of Christ to Mary, so that she never has the stain of original sin. That's the dogma. All right? Again, unknown in the early church, 7 different popes taught that the only person born without stain of original sin was Jesus. You won't find any teaching or preaching on this. Even Thomas Aquinas rejected this formulation. He didn't reject a concept of Immaculate Conception, but he rejected this formulation that became the eventual dogma. Hence, if anyone shall dare, now this is 1854, this is 100 years before Vatican II. Hence, if anyone shall dare, which God forbid, to think otherwise, not just teach, but to think otherwise than has been defined by us, let him know and understand that he is condemned by his own judgment, that he has suffered shipwreck in the faith, that he is separated from the unity of the church, and that furthermore, by his own actions, he incurs the penalties established by law if he should dare to express in words or writing or by any other outward means the errors he thinks in his heart. Those words used to have meaning. I would say the vast majority of people teaching in Catholic universities today do not believe this. I really do. So, finally, the bodily assumption of Mary, defined and declared November 1st, 1950. Since then, the universal church, in which the Spirit of truth flourishes, who infallibly directs it to achieve a knowledge of revealed truths, has through the course of the ages repeatedly manifested its own faith, and since the bishops of the whole world, with almost unanimous consent, request that the truth of the bodily assumption of the bodily assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary into heaven be defined as a dogma of the divine and Catholic faith, a truth which is founded on the sacred scriptures, right, has been fixed deeply in the minds of the faithful in Christ, unknown. In fact, interestingly enough, well, I'll get to that in a second, has been approved by ecclesiastical worship even from the earliest times, that's a pure lie, is quite in harmony with other revealed truths, no, it's not, and has been splendidly explained and declared by the zeal, knowledge, and wisdom of the theologians, depends on what theologians. We think that the moment appointed in the plan of a provident God has now come to proclaim solemnly such an extraordinary privilege of the Virgin Mary. Accordingly, by the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, the blessed apostles Peter and Paul, and by our own authority, and our is capitalized in their own version, we, capitalized, pronounce, declare, and define that the dogma was revealed by God, that the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever-Virgin Mary, after completing her course of life upon earth, was assumed to the glory of heaven both in body and soul. Therefore, if anyone, which may God forbid, should dare either to deny this or voluntarily call into doubt what has been defined by us, he should realize that he has cut himself off entirely from the divine and Catholic faith. Now, the early fathers had no concept of this doctrine. The first appearance of the doctrine is found in the Transitus Beate Maria of Pseudo Melito, a heretical work condemned by Gelasius, Bishop of Rome, in AD 495. He condemned the work, not the doctrine. But this is the first written place that we find the doctrine of bodily assumption of Mary. And it was condemned as heretical by Gelasius, the Bishop of Rome, half a millennium, almost 500 years after the birth of Christ. You find nothing in the first 500. Rome talks about we're the church of 2,000 years. And then she defines stuff like this, which is so self-evidently not a part of the apostolic preaching and teaching. This doctrine is utterly unknown to Scripture or to tradition. I've only had one Catholic apologist defend this doctrine against me in debate, Robertson Jennis. Give him props. He's a convert to Catholicism too. And what was his whole argument? Acts 15. If the early church can have a council and teach authoritatively in Acts 15, then what was done in 1950 has biblical basis. They don't pretend there's anything in the Bible about this. And what's interesting is this. If you listen carefully, the dogma does not tell you whether Mary died or not. Doesn't say. It says at the end of her life, but it doesn't say she died or not. You can believe Mary died. You can believe that Mary never died. Both are acceptable opinions within Roman Catholicism. Now, when you think about it for a second, though, if she never sinned, which of course they assert that, even though numerous early church fathers accused her of sin, and if she never had the stain of original sin, why would she die at all anyways? Because the wages of sin is death. But if she has no original sin and never commits sin, why would she die? We are not told. We are not told.
Now, I give you scriptures. If you're going to...
Okay, here is 54 seconds. There have been a lot of interesting events in my debates over the years. This is one of the early ones. In fact, the first debate that Jerry and I did on Long Island, we did all 4 Marian dogmas in one night. That was a long night. This is at the Coral House in Baldwin, Long Island. And we've gotten to the last one. So we've already gone through 3 other dogmas before we got to this one. Here's the cross-examination. The poor moderator is a Jewish guy who really doesn't care about any of this stuff. He just looks bored out of his mind. He always did whenever he did the moderation of these debates. But here's Jerry and I going back and forth. And again, this is a while back, and the audio was taken off house sound rather than from the microphones. But see if you can follow what's going on here as Jerry and I go at it.
Scriptures. If you're going to... You're arguing in circles. You don't know if they're scriptures if the people who tell you the scriptures are untrustworthy. Now, those same people also give tradition saying the apostles taught special things about marriage. And if you impeach those witnesses and say, those church fathers don't know what the heck they're talking about, you have no way of knowing that they're giving you a Bible. You can Athanasius gave me, Athanasius gave me the same canon of the New Testament I have. Show me one place where you talk about assumption of marriage or Indian coronation. I don't have to know about the councils. Hippo, Carthage, I don't want. Mr. White, you're making the assertion that they taught these same things and I'm undercutting my own self. They didn't teach I don't have to demonstrate that every single church father taught every single thing. How about just one of them?
How about just one of them? That was a pretty classical line. And because the people in the audience were following this, they were recognizing it. They saw what he was doing. And so when he said, I don't have to show you that every church father, I said, how about just one of them? And the whole place erupted. And that was pretty much the end of the debate that night. I could show you I could tell you all sorts. See, I don't like having to rush through this stuff because I could tell you all sorts of really cool stuff about the background of all this stuff, but we don't have the time to do that this morning. Okay, the concept of Mary as co-redemptrix with Christ is found in the very same pietistic literature from which such concepts as the Immaculate Conception and the bodily Assumption sprang. The single most popular collection of this kind of piety is found in Alphonsus de Liguori. Please notice the proper spelling of Liguori. You would assume it would be Ligouri, but it's Uori if you're looking for it. The Glories of Mary, a work which has gone through 800 editions. And here's some quotes. It is the will of God that all graces should come to us by the hands of Mary, meaning that the plenitude of grace was in Christ as the head from which it flows, as from its source, and in Mary as in the neck through which it flows. For in all dangers thou canst obtain salvation of this glorious virgin. This is repeated over and over again. In the Roman Catholic idea, grace comes from God as the head, but it has to flow through Mary as the neck, that then turns the head of God and turns God's attention to you so you can receive grace. I mean, this is the centrality of Mary in this type of literature. All graces are dispensed by Mary, and that all who are saved only by the means of this divine mother. It is upon preaching Mary and exciting all to confidence in her intercession. Her intercession. The praise of Mary is an inexhaustible fount. The more it is enlarged, the fuller it gets. And the more you fill it, so much the more it is enlarged. That if all the tongues of men were put together, and even if each of their members was changed into a tongue, they would not suffice to praise her as much as she deserves. And never lose an opportunity, either in public or in private, of enkindling in the hearts of others those blessed flames of love which they themselves burn towards their beloved Queen. On this account it was, says St. Bernard, that the Eternal Father, wishing to show all the mercy possible, besides with giving us Christ, our principal advocate with him, was pleased also to give us Mary as our advocate with Jesus Christ. There is no doubt, the saint adds, that Jesus Christ is the only mediator of justice between men and God, that by virtue of his own merits and promises, he will and can obtain us pardon and the divine favors. But because men acknowledge and fear the divine majesty which is in him as God, for this reason, it was necessary to assign us another advocate to whom we might have recourse with less fear and more confidence. And this advocate is Mary, than whom we cannot find one more powerful with his divine majesty or one more merciful towards us, ourselves. The saint says, Christ is a faithful and powerful mediator between God and men, but in him men fear the majesty of God. A mediator then was needed with the mediator himself. Nor could a more fitting one be found than Mary. That is the essence of the glories of Mary. That is the essence of the Roman Catholic understanding of Mary's role. And that is why the internet is filled with videos of people in the middle of the night walking through towns in Europe or Central America, Mexico, with huge statues of Mary. That's why I've seen recently, really popular, I saw a rave worship of Mary recently, but they'll do this thing. Well, they'll take a statue of Mary with this huge, long, flowing veil, and they'll bring her down the center of the aisle in the church, and all the people will sit there, and the veil will go over top of them, and they're weeping, and they're crying, and they're just so in love with Mary, because Mary is the source of mercy, not Jesus. Mary is the source of that mercy. It's an amazing thing to watch. I saw a hand somewhere.
Yeah, I do have a question. I just want to know if it's out of ignorance, maybe, that there's some Roman Catholics who try to defend their worship of Mary by the falling. Is there information in it?
Oh, no. That's not ignorance. That's the official position of the church.
It's a common thing, actually.
Oh, no, that's the official position of the church. The official position of the church, Mary, only God receives latria. Saints and angels can receive dulia. And Mary alone receives hyperdulia. And again, if we know our history, if you read the Institutes of Christian Religion, John Calvin addresses the reality of what latria and dulia are in the Bible. The Hebrew term avad, to serve, worship, is translated by two different Greek words in the Greek Septuagint, latruo and doulia. So biblically, there is no distinction between worship and service, but they're not bound by Scripture. They're bound by the authority of the teaching magisterium. There's a whole discussion of this in my book, Roman Catholic Controversy. A whole discussion of my debate with Patrick Madrid, Veneration of Saints and Angels from early 2000s, I think, on Long Island. And so this is this would be something that every single Puritan minister, every single Church of England minister, after the Reformation would know everything about. They would know about the Hebrew, they'd know about the Greek Septuagint. You had to know this stuff, because this was they weren't arguing with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, they were arguing with Roman Catholics. And this is what they were arguing about. So it's not ignorance, that's the official position of the church.
So they're just giving it a different name, not calling it worship. Or what they say.
Well, interestingly enough, there's a video came out recently about Trent Horn using the term worship of Mary. But what he means by that is worthship, assigning certain worth to her. If you push any of them, they will default back to there's a difference between latria and dulia. And you push them back and say, biblically, there's not, and Moses would have had you stoned. Okay, that's just all there is to it. That's the fundamental issue that you're dealing with here in this particular subject in regards to Mary. But yeah, the technical difference is it's not idolatry, because we're not giving Mary what we give only to God. But we are giving her something that only she's given, hyperdulia.
I guess that begs the question of what does God get that she didn't?
That's a good question. They would say the worship we give to God is of a different level. How do you see that? You don't see that. You don't see it. You don't see them rocking back and forth for a statue of God, praying the way they fervently pray to Mary. No, it is painfully obvious that in South America, Mexico, places in Spain, et cetera, Mary is the center of devotion of the Roman Catholic Church. There's no question about it. None. Okay, we see Mary. I'm, just running short here. Let me see how many more here. All right, I'll have time to finish this up. We'll be able to move on from here. It is time to take a break. It's 9:30, and